Hello, everyone. Hope you have a good day. We talk a lot about AI. I think you get convinced that if you are in this room, that AI is actually to thrive. Now, technologies are not business models. And obviously, the key questions most of my clients are asking is that, what do I do with these technologies? Is it going to be scaling? And is it going to be something that I can really use for competitive advantage? Now, again, at this stage, we are pretty much early days about these technologies. This chart summarizes it. A lot of companies are trying these technologies, but are not yet necessarily at the stage of scaling in business process and workflows, and et cetera. But we start to have a bit of a good feeling about what's going to happen. And in fact, when you look today, pretty much only 3% of companies are actually having the use cases across every type of business function of their business models. Obviously, most of them are digital companies, but some of them are big companies, incumbents, that already are experimenting at scale with these technologies. So what I will try to do today is to give you a bit of the insight working with these companies, not on what exactly they do, but what we find out to be the commonalities of their success in scaling successfully these technologies. Now, bear with me that there are likely more than the 5 I will give you, but that the 5 that we find to be the most relevant, at least from the eyes of those companies. Now, the reason why I can tell you about these 5 ones is not because we work with 1 or 2 cases. In fact, it's the synthesis about 700 use cases, of which we have been very deep into the detail from the data economics, the data pipe, the business models, etc. On top of that, we enrich that with quite a few surveys, because from the inside of this use case, we can design markets research as to the fundamental questions we want to ask. And finally, on top of that, because for the fun of it, we want to make sure we say something which is relevant, we look at the statistical facts around that and say, do we got lucky to find out what we find, or is it something which is statistically robust? So bear with me that at the end of the day, what I will try to convey is based on enough of insight and data points and living experiments to give you the insight we have. So first observation, why we can talk about it, is that we were quite surprised, in fact, that if you look at AI, and again, let me first define what I mean by AI. AI is a set of technologies which you can combine that possibly one day will replicate a lot of the cognitive functions that humans have today. Some of that could be voice recognition, sometimes it's going to be video recognition, sometimes it's automated processes and the like. But the fundamental point is that if we look at AI at this stage today, pretty much in every business domains, we start to see cases where these technologies have been rolled out at scale. So again, if you put yourself 20 years ago at the start of digital were pretty much non-automated technologies. They tend to be pretty much in the sales and marketing area. What we find out in the business domain of AI is that it's already spreading pretty much everywhere. So that's the good news. That means we got a lot of difference by business case and use case that we can do. So let me give you the 5 themes which we believe you should be at least compliant with if you want to be successful in AI. The very first one is a simple one, but in fact, what we find is that there is not too much of value of waiting. You have to jump on the AI race. And the major reason why you have to do it is a very simple fact, which is you don't do AI just for a playing field. You do it for competitive advantage and for growth. So imagine you are Amazon and you automate the logistics of your business process. Jeff Bezos does not do it because they believe that by automation, they don't need the people in the logistics center. He does it because if you automate the logistics center, I can fulfill the promise of on the same day you can receive the goods that you have bought. It's about business model innovation. If you are Netflix, you automate obviously the system of recommendation. You do it because humans don't have the versatility to actually cherry pick in the total catalogs of the inside. But on top of that, they know from recommendation that at the end of the day, if you have that in front of your screen, you will consume more and you'll be retaining Netflix. So the first myth is that a lot of people talk about the future of work and the consequence of labor automation. In fact, all the people who use AI are doing it for one single purpose, is to gain a competitive advantage. And that's what you see in the use case, and you try to allocate that. You see there are a few cost drivers. That could be capital efficiency, that could be reduction of labor cost. But at the end of the day, the growth drivers, i.e. increasing the market pie, creating new markets and new market segments, as much as, by the way, capture money out of your own pocket if you don't do it, is actually as important as the cost reduction. So you have to do it because you are going to be innovative. So one of the first questions I always ask people when they do AI is very simple. Are you going to be resegmenting the market? If you don't have a question to that, your AI strategy is doomed to fail, because if you innovate in products and services, you are likely to have different set of customers' expectation, different type of customer segments, and so on. Second point is that the evidence is quite strong. If you're innovative and you shape the market or you redistribute the market, most of the time you're going to grow very differently. That's the statistics we find out by looking at the guys who are using this use case at scale, and we ask them, who are the competitors? And we don't get the data from markets research, we get the data from the competitors in terms of how they behave and what the financials look like. And we find surprising things. This is actually the marginal effect on the profit growth. So we got categories of AI adopters, those guys that not only are fast in ingesting these technologies, but they do it for innovative business model. You got fast AI adopters that do it pretty much for the labor cost or the capital cost element, and you get then the followers and the guys who are not doing it. See the difference. The guys who are the fast adopters, and especially with an innovation focused, basically have a long-standing baseline growth of 7% of profit growth higher. Guess what? The guys who are not doing it are still in the limbo of waiting for doing AI, the resistant one, are minus 7% in the medium term. So that means money will change hands. So you have no choice to do that. By the way, you ask people, they tell you that. When we do the market research, they tell you that most of the time the reason why there will be a bit of a herd behavior in terms of AI adoption is that about 50% of them say, it's going to hurt me. If I don't do it, my major competitors will take share of my market. And pretty much these people are saying, well, in some case, 20% of them at least says, it's going to hurt my economics badly, more than 10% a year. That means in 5 years' time, you're pretty much out of business. So that leads to my first point. You should not wait because the option value of waiting is close to zero, because it's all about innovation and market share gain. Second point, and I think people have alluded to that, when you do AI, you say, okay, I'm doing it, I'm going to innovate. There's all the pipe of the business processes to be amended. You're possibly going to have a future of work issues where you have to reshift some of the people. But fundamentally, the question is not to get rid of people, as I said. It's about having the right skills to make sure you can scale your AI. And the surprising thing today is that most of the clients we work with, the first questions they ask when they've defined the business model is that, do I have the right skill to scale it? Obviously, they automate a lot of part of the business system, but the rest of the people, 50, 70% of them are still there. Do they have the right skill to actually work on this thing? And by the way, this is a massive HR transformation issue. So the second point is that who in your company got an HR person that, by the way, is on the board of the company and is he in charge of the major HR transformation process to make sure your AI flow correctly to create a successful business model? Now, the first thing that you know is quite evident. If you look at companies with high digital skills, i.e. not necessarily people that can code, but people can interpret data and scale a business model out of that, that's what you see in this chart. The more you got on the digital skills, the faster you see AI adoptions at the level of the sectors. So there is no way to think that if you are going to be in an AI, you don't multiply by a factor of 2 to 3 the side of the people that are digitally savvy to leverage data and the business model that you do. That's one aspect of the skills. The second aspect of the skills is that they submit to think that everything will be clever, automated, and we don't need you. At the end of the day, there are complementary skills that are going to be complementing the AI processes. And they come from two sides, cognitive skills and social skills. Cognitive skills in that sense means creativity. As far as I know, robotics can start to, AI can start to self-learn from the data, but the data can be biased. The data, it's only the data. If you don't have the fuel to basically make the car work, the car does not work. The car does not work, but the fuel does not make the car only work correctly. You still have a driver to drive the car correctly. So you need interpreter, the cognitive skills. These are interesting data. This is the data from the first digital site from the last 20 years. And it shows the value of the jobs that you have. So if you look at the matrix and you take high social skills, meaning you are able to work in emotional stage, you can do work with teams and so on, and you got the cognitive skills, what do you see? You see the cumulative change in employment in the US has been the biggest one. So it's quite interesting because it said the market is moving up in skill, but skill are enlarging. If you're a geek and you have great coding skill on the cognitive skills, yes, there is more employment, 8%, but your salary does not necessarily going to go up. It's -4. So that means that your competitive advantage is not there. It's actually a playing field, but it's a contestable market. If you combine the cognitive skills with the social skills, you see the demand is much higher, and salary in real wage has been increasing in the US. So the combination of these two skills is quite important. We look at that in detail, and in fact, whatever industries you look at, this is the reach of the skills that you need. So a number like basic cognitive skills, let's say in ICT, today pretty much everybody needs at least basic high school skills to be working in ICT. So you have a 100% or 90%. I'm looking at the delta from there. First observation, if you look at this data from the bottom-up analysis of the case that we have, so real numbers behind that, what you find out is that obviously physical skill is going to go a bit down. Sensory skill will go a bit down because machines can do it correctly. But what you see is that social emotional skills and advanced cognitive skills, whatever industry you take, going to be actually higher. And by the way, they will be higher in industry where we think that we don't have a competitive advantage, like manufacturing, for instance. So the second observation from a CHRO point of view is that it's not about scaling digital, it's scaling in the same process, the right combination of skills in social, emotional, and advanced cognitive skills that are actually the user of the data and the AI that you deliver. Now, I can tell you it's massive change. If you happen to be AT&T and you put yourself in the perspective about what will be the telecom of the future in 2030, you are likely to say all the engineers are very good in copper, but the next day they will have to be good in IP, and possibly they will have to be very good in Internet of Things and AI. You're going to have to basically change directly the full workflow and obviously the skills that they have. So that means that AT&T is engaged on changing the workflow and impacting pretty much 120,000 people out of a workforce of 200,000. I repeat, 120,000 people will have to change job in the next 10 years about on 200. And in that, you're going to have to lay off some people, rehire some people, and reshift skill. Massive HR transformation. And that's, by the way, what, for instance, SAP is doing. And again, here are a few of a soft element of that transformation, which is sometimes something that most of you possibly don't think too much about that. But SAP has been building that platform of AI and basically shifting all its HR strategy about lifelong learning. And again, the same point, it has to be fast, sense of urgency. It has to be multi-year. You don't build these skills in 1 or 2 settings. It's actually a lot about like the customer journeys, about learning journeys to basically build these skills. It's a transformation, as I said, not a restructuring. It's about constant feedback, and it's repetitive momentum. So this is a change that's going to basically, in SAP, for instance, will last for 2 years on top of what you do in the engineering in the pipe of the data. If you don't have a CHRO that basically can make that HR transformation, you're doomed to fail and not to scale in AI. Point number 3, obviously, it's about reinvent. There is no single model in digital disruption. Whoops. Seems that I've been disrupted. There is no business model in the case of incumbents where you are not going to be reinvent it with success. So I go back, sorry, to the point number 3. Here we go. The facts are very strong. So if you look, for instance, in digitization, digitization has been quite interesting. The first wave of digital, if you think about the media, for instance, or the retail, were 2 cases example from my predecessor on stage. We're seeing that 2 case example of real digitization. Revenue as well as EBIT have been declining. The guys who did digital were actually making a bit more money than the rest. And the guys who got to be the first in the game were the early movers and tend to be actually growing better than the rest. Now, the surprising thing, and these are these guys' data, we look at the P&L of all the guys that we find scaling the AI today versus the list ex ante of their major competitors. And we ask them, okay, how do you do on the business model and the profitability and the like? And we find a very striking discrimination. We see a bifurcation. The guys that basically adopt and reinvent the business model attached to the AI use case they have, systematically grow their profit margin. All the guys who don't actually decrease. That's very staggering because we have, again, 3% of companies doing that scale today. So we are at the very beginning of AI. Technologies are very functional, are not as smart as we think. They're artificial, but not smart. And despite that, they're already making a discrimination in profitability quite significantly. So there is no scope to say, I'm going to do this experiment and not reinvent. The guys who reinvent actually already bifurcate the profit pool to their advantage. So it's better to self-cannibalize yourself because the advantage of self-cannibalization is that the money is still in your pocket, but for the one you lose, you're possibly 2 or 3 times better in the future that you gain. Point number 4, there is a bit of the myth that AI is the next wave and you don't have to rely on what's happening on digital. Obviously, AI is just a set of technologies on the building blocks of digital. So don't jump on AI and think that it solves your weakness in digital. Digital is obviously the first wave to do. You have to make sure the digital building blocks and the baselines is there, otherwise it's not going to work. Why? Because AI depends on the fact that you have access to data. You need agility in the access to data, so possibly you need an IT architecture with at least a cloud dimension, and so on and so on. And by the way, most of the time, if you're not good in having a digital marketing side, if you scale it to automation, AI is going to be much more successful indeed. But if you have not done the first step, you're likely to be in a situation where you're not good enough. So don't jump the gun, even if you're convinced that on my first statement, there is no value of waiting. But there is a high value of fixing, get the baseline right. So you need to have the digital first observe. So in fact, when you look at that, it's very easy. Factually, if you look at the digital technology diffusion by sectors versus the AI adoption, you see obviously the strong correlation. The two are obviously quite interlinked. You cannot do a good AI if you don't have the foundation of digital right. So if you are to jump on the AI not being digital savvy, you're going to have to do twice the same thing as somebody will do just on AI. What are the reasons why? As I said, it's a technical dimension, it's a learning dimension. If you look at the questions, typically, we find these things. In fact, 2 out of 10 times, there is possibly no link between AI and digital. In fact, when you do the first basic of robotization, you don't need necessarily a lot of the data inside. Usually it's clumsy anyway. But most of the time, you need both. And as I said, most of the time, it's because the tools are the same, the data foundations are the same, and more than ever, it's about learning. You learn by experimenting, and if you don't do that, jumping directly the gun on AI without having the experimentation culture is something that's not going to work. So it's quite important to have that as part of your strategy. Last but not least, if AI is innovative and is basically business model innovative, there is no way you can do everything by yourself, and there's no way that at the end of the day, the industry structure where you are, there's this reference to Michael Porter's framework. Michael Porter's framework has force that works within an industry. The fundamental question of AI and digital is not that there are forces tapping into the industry. The industry boundaries themselves are changing. Today, bankers obviously all dream to be as well retailers, or bankers want to be mobile banking and basically do telcos. So the industry boundaries are changing. So it's not a Michael Porter's discussion. It's actually an industry definition, the ecosystem that you need to build. So most of the time, platforms existing that way. Most of the digital platforms we know are obviously multi-industries. Think about Google, think about Amazon and the like. They basically go to multiple categories and diversification of the business model in multiple aspects of the business system. That's one aspect of the ecosystem you're going to have to master. So don't think of doing AI with the people in your company that are the bankers if you want to do AI in banking. You need people from outside the industry to think about the customer journeys and change the rules of the game. Think about Ping An, for instance, as an issuer in China. The first thing he did to make sure AI can work was to buy all the classifieds. Why will an insurer buy classified where a market that obviously digital is scaling, but at the end of the day, why should you do it? Well, you do it because you have the data and the insight that if people are going to buy a home and look at the classified, you know that at that time you are at the point where these guys will basically buy a home and you possibly can submit them an insurance. But the run is not done by the technical department of the insurance guys. It's run by the marketing department of the classified guys. And it's an overall that you see. So you need that ecosystem to work. Last but not least, the ecosystem is not only about industry, it's about how do you partner with the right people to scale. AI is a complex game, as I said, and most of the time, there is no way that you will be owning all the data, that you'll have all the scale to do everything innovative and the like. And most of the time, there is possibly a lot of bottlenecks in the ecosystem such that you cannot own everything. Think about today, data engineers or data translator. As a fact, we have an excess demand of these people. So there is no way that you can think that you can attract all of them, except if you happen to be Google and you buy the companies with the talents, or you are willing to go for war for talent and pay 3 times the price. So the point most of the time is that possibly you need to find cooperation model, outsourcing model in terms of that. On top of that, AI is a lot about innovation. So if you think about innovation, maybe you have to crowdsource your own users. You possibly work in R&D with universities, et cetera, et cetera. And most of the time, even on the government side and the like, there is a lot you can do. Finally, if you change the industry, it's actually an interesting outcome. That means the major competitors that define your industry are no longer your competitors because you change the industry game. So maybe these guys can be your complementers and can scale the business model of shaping new industry boundaries. So think about cooperation not in the spirit of competition and how do I share the pie, but how, for instance, banks can cooperate between themselves, or retailers can cooperate with banks and the like is quite important. So I synthesize that again in my 5 points. What we learn is that AI is faster than what we thought. We find as well that AI is important from a business side simply because for the first time it's a competitive race, but it's also a business model race. In that, 5 things are important to do beside all the things that possibly you do today, and maybe they are fantastic, and maybe that's what you have to do in the playing field, but they don't give you competitive advantage. What gives you competitive advantage is speed. Be the first, scale and innovate. The second one is that, don't forget, we are not going to be all automated. In the future of work, in the worst case scenario, 50% of us will not have job, but that still means that 50% will still have job. And we have to find a new job structure and everything else. It's a massive HR transformation. Point number 3, as I said, is that you are going to make it as a business model reinvention, because it's redefined totally the innovation through the economics, the marginal economics of AI. Point number 4, sure, don't jump yesterday, jump Monday morning. So make sure in between you are doing the digital transformation and the basic block. If you don't have the basic blocks of the digital transformation, you are likely to fail in scaling AI. And last but not least, the way you think about industry is likely to change if you believe what I said, because the AI scaling will not only change the conduct of the industry, but will fundamentally change the industry structure. Your competitors of today could be your best ally of tomorrow. And on top of that, if you want to scale, don't get in the way of owning everything, because owning everything takes time, takes a lot of money. So actually create ecosystem of partnerships. Thank you.